thank you very much for joining in to this Liberating Cinema Symposium. My name is Mina Radović. I'm the founder and director of Liberating Cinema. We're a non-profit charitable organization registered in Scotland and committed to the representation, restoration, and exhibition of world cinema heritage. I hope you all saw the film, which is on our website, since this is the only way it's available to a wider audience, especially abroad. So, on the 23rd of October, 1911, 100 years ago today exactly, the premiere of the first Serbian feature film and one of the world's first feature films took place in front of audiences in the Hotel Paris and in the royal court of His Majesty King Petar I, known as King Peter the Liberator, and one of the most beloved kings in Serbian history. This is also the point where we should say that the first film ever made in Serbia and the Balkan Peninsula was also the coronation of King Peter I of Serbia. Today I have the great pleasure to introduce His Royal Highness Crown Prince Aleksandar Karađorđević of Serbia, who honors us with his presence. Like his great-grandfather, the beloved King Peter, we share with His Royal Highness 110 years of the film Karađorđe's life. Today is also a special occasion because the film we're presenting to you, generously provided by our colleagues at Jugoslovenska Kinoteka, the Yugsolav Cinematheque in Belgrade, was long thought to be lost. It was, however, discovered in the Film Archive Austria in Vienna by our colleagues from the Cinematheque in 2003 and has since been restored. In this sense, today's symposium is a special occasion for reflecting also on the importance of both the historical, cultural, and artistic value of the film. The film, The Life and Deeds of the Immortal Vožd Karađorđe, is the film about the founder of the Royal House of Karađorđević, the Vožd Đorđe Petrović, who received the name Karađorđe after his dark looks, and who was the great leader of the First Serbian Uprising against the Ottoman Empire in 1804, which also represented one of the first open revolts in the Balkans against centuries of Ottoman occupation. The Royal House of Karađorđević played a pivotal role in the life of the Serbian people and in the establishment of the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, what would become known in 1929 as the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. Now, I just need to give you instructions. So we'll speak with His Royal Highness first, and then the questions will be taken through the chat. So if you would please, if you have any questions, send them directly to me, and I will relay them to His Royal Highness. And at some point, His Royal Highness may have to leave us, and after that, we will continue as I share with you the presentation about the film from the Yugsolav Cinematheque, and then we'll have the opportunity to discuss the film. But without further ado, I have the joy to present the successor and the head of the Royal House of Karađorđević, His Royal Highness Crown Prince Aleksandar of Serbia. Your Highness, good morning.
Thank you very much, Mina. Good morning, everybody. It's good to see you there in Scotland.
Thank you. The discovery of this film was a historic moment and quite a miracle, right? I mean, what was your impression about the film? What is your impression about the film?
Well, I think it's quite remarkable. The first film with a story so long ago that we're able to see it again and that it's been restored. I enjoyed it very much. I'd like to congratulate you for the hard work.
Thank you. I wonder, basically, I was just thinking about, could you tell us a little bit about your ancestor, Karađorđe, and what he means to you and your family?
Well, you so well put it in the beginning. He was the founder of the dynasty. He did the insurrection against the Turks in 1804 in Orašac. He was a hero. He was a very tough chap, I must admit, reading about him. And of course, the insurrection was successful for a while. And then there was another insurrection or event that was with Obrenović. But he did found the dynasty. And then you mentioned King Peter I. Yes, he was an extraordinary king and extremely popular. But before him, we mustn't forget Prince Aleksandar, who did a lot for our education system in Serbia. And then you mentioned also, again, King Peter I, the king of not only the Serbs, then the Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. And then in 1929, my grandfather, King Aleksandar, renaming it into the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. And then it gets very difficult and quite tragic during the Second World War, the assassination of my grandfather, the Second World War, civil war during the Second World War, and the war against the Nazis, and then total madness in the 1990s.
Now, in a way, I think also Karađorđe led the historic events for the Serbian people. So King Peter the Liberator was present at the original premiere of this film. about him, and equally then led historical events, right, in the years to come. So with the Golgothan quest of the First World War, I think, as you said. So what is, I mean, my question then, I guess, tying to what you were just saying so wonderfully, what is your relationship to your ancestors? And could you say a little bit more about the role and importance of the royal family for Serbia today?
I think one of the most important relationship, apart from Karađorđe being a hero, and then other members of my family doing some remarkable things, is that the dynasty is homegrown, it's domestic. We're not an import, so we're deeply connected to the people of the country. I think that's very, very important. Even though there are marriages in the future, if I may put it like that, with other members of royal families, for example, Montenegro, and of course Romania, which was a remarkable one with my grandmother, Queen Maria. But every member has contributed historically. The situation of where we live really at the cross of civilizations. And so we've witnessed a lot of conflicts, wars in this area. And to put it very simply, it wasn't until quite recently that things settled down. If you look at it, we had the Balkan Wars, the First World War, then we had the rise of fascism, the depression between the two big wars, economic problems, and then we had the bombing in April 6, 1941, my father leaving the country. Then we had a civil war, then the communists taking over power at the end of the war, and then years of, shall we say, love and hate from the West, not realizing who the man was running the country, a great friend of the United States, United Kingdom, of course, and so on. And I was born in 1945 and 1947. I became enemy of the state. 2 years old. I must have been very dangerous to have done that. This is absolutely ridiculous, human rights violation. And my poor father suffered from this, being in exile all these years. He thought he'd go back the next day to his homeland, to Serbia. I'm very proud that my family lives here now. We've been living here now for 20 years. We came to live here in July 2001, excuse me. And we've seen a lot and we're moving ahead and there's so much more to be done. But at least we're here and we contribute to the country. Yes, there's a historical side, but my wife and I have charities. My wife has a humanitarian charity. I have an education charity, and we do our bit. We live in the house of my grandfather. That's the palace, which he built with his own money, paid taxes, and is still confiscated, ironically. And that's all. I'd be glad to answer questions at the end.
Thank you very much. That's you put it very precisely and very nicely. And I know, so if anybody, to tell all our viewers as well, as you said, we know that the royal family does incredible charitable work. And with your reputation, you're capable of helping both your people and your homeland. So, but and now another aspect perhaps we haven't touched upon is the question of art. We know that the royal family historically are great connoisseurs of art. And perhaps from what I know, you had one of the first private cinemas in history, which is another story in itself. Do you think the consciousness of people can be strengthened through culture, art, through cinema?
Culture and art are very important to a nation. Unfortunately, in our case, they were greatly neglected to all the conflict and, put it very bluntly, the madness. It's only recently that we've started taking an interest in resuscitating our art. We have a lot of art. I mean, for example, this film was in the Kinoteka. The Kinoteka is a mine of incredible films that I've been down there in Belgrade to have a look at it. And so we are learning a lot. We are endowed with wonderful artists. And I believe that we can rejoin the world of art and culture with our effort. And of course, we need some funding to do that. But I think eventually we will come on board, as one might say.
Thank you. I'm just going to open up now for questions. If anyone has through the chat, please send me them, and then we can relay them to His Royal Highness. I would like to just tie on while we're waiting for questions, just to tie on to what you said about the Kinoteka. I think it's quite a miracle that a lot of these films were discovered only, recently. And in the 2000s, when it comes to Karađorđe, there's also a lot of great work, which we'll, I think, talk about separately. The work of Đorđe Bogdanović, who, filmed the Balkan Wars, the First World War, and there's quite a lot of documents there, that are only currently being restored. So I think it's quite an interesting landscape after all. Yes, I wonder, what's your opinion about, having the first film in our country, and one of the best films being about your ancestor? That's maybe more now a personal question, but
I feel very proud that it is one of the first films that was done, apart from the coronation film, of course. But the first film about my family was historical, and I'm so glad that it was restored. Many of these films were on these sellotape, or I don't know what you call it, and they were very, very volatile. And so after October 5th, 2000, an interest took place in the Kinoteka. We found out, as you just mentioned, that they were sitting on a huge amount of material, and gradually they've been working hard, and they did get some funding, but I think much more is needed to help them.
Thank you. Yes, I just received a question from one of our audience members. Can His Royal Highness could you tell us about your relationship to Serbs abroad? You play an important role in the sense of unity. So perhaps kind of something about your relationship to Serbs abroad.
Well, having lived in exile, the relationship is good on many continents. In Europe, particularly in the United Kingdom, Germany, France, and elsewhere, and in America, or the North American continent, the United States and Canada. And then Australia is not one we must not forget. So my wife and I visited all these entities, and we've been very well received. And unfortunately, due to COVID now, over a year and a half, we've not been able to cultivate this relationship. But before COVID, we were very active, not only seeing these communities, but these communities were very good in doing charities for my wife's foundation. She founded Lifeline Humanitarian Help, and they were very good in supporting us. And of course, these families who were part of these charitable events or these receptions were supporting their own families wherever they exist in the former Yugoslavia.
Thank you very much. Very fitting. I think I have several other questions. Perhaps is it possible? Just let me see. I have another one. Can the royal family be more in the media? We know how much charities they're doing. Serbian people are interested in your work. Is your presence in media quite prominent, or could there be more to be done in terms of the media?
Regarding the Serbian domestic media, we're subscribed to a clipping service. And every day there's approximately 15, 20 clippings. Of course, we've had the situation after coming here to live here in July 2001, there has been a certain, may I put it, censorship because of all the terrible stories was said about my family, that we ran away with trainloads of gold, which is absolute rubbish, that we stole this and that and all sorts of garbage. So we've been spending a lot of years trying to put things right and put things out that are right. It's getting much, much better. Under this presidency, there's much more coverage than before. And I think this will improve as we move ahead. Regarding media abroad, well, in the 90s, I did have a lot of coverage, particularly in the foreign media in the United States, United Kingdom, and in France, not that much in Germany. And now, once in a while, there's coverage, but the foreign media is only interested when we're killing each other. That's blunt, isn't it? You know, it creates a story, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, very blunt. I think what you said also about the running with train wheels of gold, I think it's quite the opposite. I mean, there's quite a lot of information we have in the everything and the history that the communists actually took and confiscated a lot of property from your royal family, as you said, and also desecrated churches and many other things. But perhaps this ties us to another question we have covered, if you don't mind. I had a question from our audience member. What is your relationship to and the family with the faith? Is Orthodoxy important for you personally and for your family? Yes.
Yes, it is. We're Orthodox, and we respect very much. I've had very good relationship with the patriarchs. We're very sad about the last patriarch, Patriarch Irene, who was very close to us, and we've had a very close relationship with the current patriarch. We have our own chapel, which is a remarkable chapel. And we even had a state funeral here, which continued in Oplanac, which is the Royal Mausoleum, about an hour away from here, when the government created this committee, which I was a member, to bring back the mortal remains of my family. And the government turned up, the president and prime minister turned up, and this chapel is quite an extraordinary one, because during the communist years, it was a storage place, except when Haile Selassie visited here, they reconsecrated it. And one of the icons, the Mother of God one, was removed, but they put a new one, which is not the most pretty one you can imagine. We found out where it is now. We hope to get that back. And then there's the extraordinary story of a bullet hole through Christ's forehead. And many stories have said who fired it. It would appear to be the apparent Soviet liberators that did that. And I've decided to maintain this bullet hole, but first we made certain there was no breakage through this roof of the chapel, and there's none, so that's quite safe. But coming back to the cinema you mentioned earlier on, yes, we have the cinema in the podrum in the basement, which is quite remarkable. And a few years ago, I was asked, would you like to see the projectionist of Tito? He's doing a film called Cinema Comunistico, and he came and he told me some extraordinary things, that there was a film every night for the president of life, and he liked cowboy films, and his favorite actor was John Wayne, and he would have his guests there, and he would sit on a sort of higher position just behind the projection hole and overlook his guests sitting below. He had a lot of time to see a lot of films.
Yes, thank you. That's a wonderful, wonderful way you've expanded on everything. I think that's very fitting.
I have another one. I'll add another one, Mina. Anyhow, we arrived here in July 2001, and then I realized our neighbor was Jovanka, the widow of Tito. And I thought, hey, I'm curious. I'd like to meet her. So I think it was about October 2001. She lived 30 meters across from the main gate of the compound. So I went over, it was all organized very quietly, to see her. And she was waiting on the steps, beautifully dressed. She used to have a French couture, and she received it. She said, "Dobroveče, Aleksandar, dobrodošli. Imam cakes za vaše, tako dalje, kafu." And we were supposed to be there an hour. We ended up being 3 hours. It was my wife, one of the sons, Philip, and myself. And the conversation was absolutely fascinating. She produced albums and albums of pictures and pictures of all the personalities that came to visit. And then next thing I hear my wife asking her, saying, "Jovanka, by the way, I have an important question. Was it your husband who fired the bullet through Christ's forehead in our chapel?" And Jovanka said, "No, Katerina, he wasn't that bad."
Oh dear. That's quite a story. I'm so happy you shared it with us.
So we took pictures and we didn't dare publish them because they say, "There's crazy Alexander showing some other things, stupid things." Maybe nowadays we should show them. Today, the prime minister lives there and they've redone the house magnificently.
Thank you. I think it's also nice because you mentioned your chapel. I think it's dedicated to Saint Andrew the First Call.
Yes,
right?
that's right.
And
That's
it ties
the
to
saint.
yes, exactly, of Scotland. So it's quite nicely.
You are, yes.
Yes. No, it's quite a nice connection, I think. I had several other questions, but maybe so we just limit it to one. What is a very simple one? Do you have a favorite film? This is, I guess, the tingling questions a lot of people ask. But would you have a favorite film that you can share with us yourself?
I like watching films, but it wouldn't be fair to single out one film and things like that. Of course, we used to go to the cinema much more often. Now it's very difficult. I wouldn't even go to a cinema. I'm very concerned because of the high incidence of COVID. But we would go to all sorts of films. I don't want to sort of single out one. Yeah, historical films are fascinating. Autobiography films are wonderful. We have a choice, of course, on television now to subscribe to these services and have a look at what's available. But no, I can't tell you a favorite film. It would be unfair. Yeah.
That's fair enough. We have several. I mean, greetings also from Serbia, from our people who have joined us from Serbia, and also congratulations on Stefan being born after so many years.
Oh yes, yeah. Well, Stefan was the first male to be born here since before the Second World War, which is quite remarkable. The last one was my uncle, Prince Tomislav. Yeah, he's a good boy. He's growing nicely.
Wonderful. I would ask you, just because I have to ask you, and I mean Uroš as well, how much more time do you have with us, just because in terms of questions, and would you...
Well, we don't want to bore you because many other people are there, and I'm certain they want to get on with what they wish to say, and it's so nice to see so many. But we're here.
Oh, good. Okay, good. Well, then if you still have time, no, I just wanted to check with Uroš. I had some other questions, but I can ask maybe, let me see. Yes, I had one question. How is it possible for our royal family to be more present in public space? I guess this question is from Serbia as well. So, is it possible for the royal family to be more present in the public sphere?
Since we came back here in 2001, we went all over the country. We visited every single hospital, every municipality. We were very well received. Better received out beyond Belgrade. Belgrade's very political, as you can imagine, which is normal. It's a capital. It's like London or Washington or Paris. But we've been everywhere, and we get invitations. Even now, during COVID, we get many invitations. And we've had to be very cautious not to turn up in auditoriums. Unfortunately, here, like everywhere else, there's an anti-vax movement, quite a strong one. And I'm an advocate, wear your mask, and get everybody else near you to wear their masks. But unfortunately, there are people who come up with outrageous conspiracy stories of what mRNA does or doesn't do and things like that. So we're being extremely cautious in accepting invitations inside, unless we're well spaced. We've accepted a lot of invitations where we're outside, and we even drove away to Praia down in where the commemoration of the 500 aviators that were saved by my father's forces. But that was all outside in the fresh air. And so we have to see what really happens. I mean, the incidence of cases here in Serbia, the UK, it's quite astonishing what's happening. So we have to follow that carefully. But we're ready to go out much, much more, as you can imagine. My son, Philip, has been more active. He's younger than me. He's going to be 40 next year. I'm in the 70s now, so I have to be a little bit more cautious.
Yes, there's a question. Would His Royal Highness like to have a film made about his life and his challenges, in the future, or about the royal family? I wonder, if this is something in production, or if this is something you thought about doing. Obviously, we're celebrating Karađorđe here today. Yeah.
Mina, it's been mentioned before, but there are too many people alive. There are too many people alive. I'll give you an anecdote. When we came here from Greece on 17th of July, 2001, and we went straight to the Federal Palace, this big building built during the communist years in New Belgrade. And I thought that the president of the federation then was Koštunica, would welcome me. But who welcomed us very warmly was the federal prime minister, and that was the late Žižić from Montenegro. And he was the one who put the whole motion in process for us to live where we are now. So you see there's different stories. Shall we say, he had a communist background, but he was more democratic than others. There you go. Became a good friend, then unfortunately became very ill.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. This is our end. I mean, this is a great, I mean, for us, I remember the time also with Žižić when he was assassinated. So, I mean, I was very small, but I still remember the years and how everyone in Belgrade and Serbia had come out. So I think I wanted to also say, because I didn't have the opportunity to say at the start, you also have greetings from Bishop Irina Dobrijević from the United States.
Oh, excellent.
Who wasn't able to join us. And I had several other people send me, I mean, kind of emails and kind of requests and their apologies, including Lazar Ristovski, who plays your great grandfather, King
Yes.
Petar, in the new film. He also, his production company, I mean, emailed me, as well as Novak Djokovic's foundation. So you have greetings from all of them, I'm sure. So, but I mean, for us, for me and for us, it's been a great honor. And I mean, I think you're a great encouragement to people. And this is what I received in the chat. We also want you to play an even greater role. So,
well, thank you very much. You've been so good to me, and thank everybody else. We should have one of these more often so we can all talk more together about all sorts of issues and pending problems. Yeah.
Thank you. Perhaps if you come to the UK at some point in the near future, this is something we can also organize in person, or it would be an honor. I mean,
that would be nice. That would be lovely. Thank you, and best wishes to everybody. Have a lovely weekend.
Thank you very much. You too.
Bye-bye.
And to your family.
Thank you. Bye.
We'll continue. I'll read just a little bit about the film now. It was a great pleasure, I mean, to have His Royal Highness with us. I hope you had a chance to watch Karađorđe. It's still up. It won't be for too long because the Cinematheque has provided me a copy, and I mean, it's a unique chance to watch the film, and it's a great film. So, and the restoration too. So it's really unique. I have something that the Cinematheque in Belgrade and the director of the archive, Aleksandar Erdeljanović, who discovered the film in Vienna with his team in 2003, that they wanted me to read to give you a bit of background. So I'll do that, and then we can just talk about the film, and we can you can ask questions as well, you know, verbally, and we can have a conversation if you like. So for a long time, even before World War II, it has been known that the first Serbian feature film Karađorđe, or by its full title, known as The Life and Deeds of the Immortal Leader Karađorđe, was shot in 1911. It was a historical drama. Some data about the film based on secondary sources, contemporary press, and memoirs were known. That the producer was Svetozar Botrović, the owner of the first Belgrade and Serbian cinema theater, and that the film was directed by theater director Ilija Stanojević, nicknamed Čiča Ilija, Uncle Ilija, and that it was photographed by a foreign operator named Louis de Berry. He also has a great connection to the Lumiere brothers, if you ever go down this route of finding out more. It was also known that the leading actor was Milorad Petrović, and in spite of many efforts undertaken by the Yugoslav Cinematheque, the National Film Archive of the Republic of Serbia, no part of this film was ever found, and the film Karađorđe was thought to be given up for lost. And that I have also some personal kind of anecdotes with people and family who, you know, when they were going to the archive in the 80s, the film was a mystery, and there was like a veil of mystery on the film because nobody could ever see it. And then suddenly, in the summer of 2003, a print of the film was found in the Film Archive of Austria in Vienna. And then since then, it's been restored and presented in 2004 initially. So that was the 200th anniversary of the First Serbian Uprising. And then the book, the first Serbian feature film, Karađorđe, was published for this occasion. In the article, Karađorđe for the second time among the Serbs, Mr Radoslav Zelenović, the then director of Jugoslovenska Kinoteka, recounts the history of the long search and final discovery of the print of Karađorđe. He stresses the importance of the find not only for Serbian cultural and film history, but also for the history of world cinema in general. Mr. Aleksandar Erdeljanović, head of the Film Archive of Jugoslovenska Kinoteka, who's asked me also to read this, in his article, Film Archaeology Discovery, Karađorđe, or the Life and Deeds of the Immortal Leader Karađorđe, describes the first contacts he had with the curator of the Film Archive Austria, Mr. Nikolaus Wostri, who still works at the archive. And who was one of the team, and their cooperation in the process of the identification of the discovered film print. He gives a historical background in the book of the film story and the chronology of the filming and the screening of Karađorđe, and he points out the documents that the preserved print is not complete and that the original film was much longer. Then there's also an article about the link that was missing by Mr. Dinko Tucaković, who is a program director at Jugoslovenska Kinoteka, who compared the film with similar historical films of the time. Despite the fact that the producer and authors of the first Serbian feature film had no film experience, the result of their work measures up to the level of the best films belonging to the same period. The acting and directing reflect the stage experience of the creators, but the story of the film flows in a clear and understandable manner. In the history of Serbian cinema, Karađorđe was the missing link between the oldest preserved documentary film material shot in Serbia in 1904, that's the coronation of King Peter that we spoke about, and then films realized after the end of the First World War. Mr. Borislav Stanojević, a librarian of Jugoslovenska Kinoteka, in his article, How to Adapt Film Karađorđe to New Visual Technologies, discusses the problem of the place of the newly found old technology film with the modern audience. So the film Karađorđe is the first Serbian feature, has a great historical value as a cultural and sociological document. Owing to standard photographic technology of printing the film has been restored as it was found. But in order to continue its cultural mission and to be accessible to the modern viewer of today and the future, the film would better fill its role if it were transferred and adapted to new visual technologies. And finally, Professor Dr. Dejan Kosanović, film historian and the reputed film historian, in his article, They Made First Serbian Films, briefly presents biographies of the four central figures in the production of Karađorđe. Svetozar Botrović, producer of the film, famous actor, theater, writer, and director Ilija Stanojević, Čiča Ilija, Uncle Ilija, who directed the film, operator Louis Petrov de Berry, who photographed the film, and the actor Milorad Petrović, who played the main part in the film. Now, two things I would just like to add is I think it's quite striking when it comes to films that were made in Serbia and then later in the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes in Yugoslavia. They were often people who made films, they did it from the grassroots. Often there was no support from the state, but some of the films they made were some of the most impressive works in film history. And that's really interesting because when you look at national cinemas, usually they emerge on a kind of, or at least we're used to that by now, they emerge on a kind of nationalized basis or on an industry run basis or a commercial run basis. And to have, a whole cinema emerge based on the efforts of filmmakers, who had in many of them who had no experience with film prior to that is fascinating. There's also kind of successors that come. Some of the first film schools in the world were also opened in Belgrade in the late 20s and 30s. And that also contributed to kind of the formulation of film education quite early on, still in the silent period. I think it's important, to know that this kind of what they put kind of asked me to read in the article is this transfer of technologies, and the fact that we now can access film like through our portal, through the website, through YouTube, and watch this film, and that it's available on DVD, and that it can be more accessible to a wider audience. I think it's important for kind of providing greater access to film heritage. So, and that's best summed up in the words. There's a great review written by the FIAF Journal of Film Preservation. It's the main international body, so International Federation of Film Archives. There was a review written on the DVD by Roger Smither, and he said, "There's always romance in any story of the finding of a lost film, but few such stories can be more romantic than that of Karađorđe, the first Serbian feature film, and how it was discovered." So I think I would like to, for me, I will share, I had one question in the chat, what is so special about this film? For me, it's a fascinating work besides what I've recounted now in terms of how it was made, in terms of the actual film itself. There is great poetic quality, which is quite rare in early, I don't want to say entirely because there are other examples, but in this form, quite rare in early cinema. And that's the way of speaking through film language. And I think I've done a lot of work on this besides this, kind of the formulation and development of film language in Serbia during the silent era. And then comparing that to wider kind of strategies and developments across the medium. And what's really nice here is if you watch the film, there are these kind of, it works like tableau, but it's not film theater. What was common at this time in the 10s was, this idea of film theater and just put on screen. Whereas, and although Čiča Ilija was a theater director, he had a great film consciousness, and this idea of kind of especially the visions and the reading of epic poetry and the way you have the foreground of its reading or the speaking about the dreams, and then you have the background where the dreams actually take place. So it's a very kind of early example, kind of the really unique and poetic use of film language to kind of relay what's going on both internally, but also kind of this poetic linkage with history. So I think that that's something for me really unique about the film. But I'm really glad that the Cinematheque kind of wanted me to read this, and I wonder if you have any questions. Yeah, if you would like to ask. I mean, you can ask also like in person. So let me just see. You can unmute yourselves. Let me just do the. Does anybody have a question? Let's see. Oh yes, I got another question while we're waiting. If anybody has a question, just put your hand up, like physically, or also you have the function if you know how to do the reaction. I got a question. Could you speak a bit more about the process of restoring films like this? Roughly how long would it take? Is special equipment required? I mean, yes, there's a long process. So I did the training with VF in terms of how it goes from the point of film identification to the final print, kind of if you do 35mm restoration or digital. So you can still do analog restoration, which does happen. But what's commonly happens also is digital restoration. So you have films. You have to first identify the films. I should say that first. So in terms of how long it can take, the first parts of the process, I think, can sometimes take years or decades, as we've discovered here, because to identify the film, I mean, with Karađorđe, it took 1928, I think, was roughly the last time the film was shown anywhere, and that was in the United States. And then after that, it just disappeared. So about then. So in terms of identifying it, that took until 2003. So we could say, like, in a way, it took 70 years, right? But in terms of when you actually get the film, that just depends on I think how big of a team you have, how big of a laboratory. It can take sometimes a few weeks, and then commonly I think I would say a few months or maybe a bit longer. It just depends on the size of the team. But yes, you do have to usually scan them. What we did is you go through an array scanner and you scan it 2K, 4K. And the great thing you can do with these things is when you do the digital restoration on the film, you can then put it back onto 35mm. So it can also exist as a kind of celluloid film as well as a digital one. So kind of to preserve the artifact, as it were. So this is, yes. Yes, I wonder if anybody else has questions. Would you like to say, I would prefer if somebody would like to speak now, since this is almost the end. So let me just click sorry, just a moment. Yeah, you can unmute yourself, I think. Yes, George, please. Yes, please unmute yourself if you have any questions. Yes.
Hi, Mina. Amazing event. Really interesting to see the film and see how much it means to the Crown Prince and to yourself as well. And so I'm wondering about the scope for this kind of work to be shared across the region. So in our session just now, it's been very clear what it means to Serbs or to citizens in Serbia. Could you say anything about your thoughts about how this kind of historical work can have meaning beyond the current politics, or in spite of the current politics, or because of the current politics? Thinking about the rest of the former Yugoslavia, states of the former Yugoslavia especially.
Thank you. Yes. So this is, I mean, we focus here because, I mean, when we spoke to His Royal Highness about the kind of quality of the film, you know, the bears importance for the royal family and for Serbia. But there is this aspect, you know, even in what I read about world cinema that we mentioned. If we speak more about the former Yugoslavia, I think initially Karađorđe was also the first film made in the Balkans. So it's not, I think there are great connections to be made. First, if you would like to speak about production connections, some of the most important kind of first Serbian filmmakers went on to do the first feature films with Bulgaria, with other countries in Greece. And then obviously, you know, we spoke about Serbian cinema heritage, but this was kind of, I would argue, you know, the foundation for then what would become Yugoslav cinema heritage. And the kind of shared heritage of the later kind of united South Slavs. This would be articulated obviously as Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes initially, but it would be then turn to Yugoslavia. So I received another question, I mean, also about the question of Serbian nationalism, because there is this attribution since the 1990s with this kind of film, and I actually think it's a gross kind of historical revisionism. So we can't take films from 1911 that were made by people who were grassroots filmmakers, enthusiasts, and contextualize them in wars that happened 80 years, 100 years later almost. So it's very, very, I mean, I think that's questionable to begin with, I think. So the discovery of this film, I think, is something quite different from that, if I can say so. So, and in that sense, and I think in that sense, what the authors say from what I read today, it's also that missing link with kind of the early film heritage. So I think it's quite important, and there's a lots of points of comparison. Like you can look at kind of the first British films or the first like Russian films. Often a lot of them had royal family, but I'm involved like one of the first films ever made was actually, and maybe symbolically, because we knew what happened later in the Soviet Union, was the coronation of the Tsar Nikolai in Russia. That was also one of the first films. In Britain also, you have many early features and films that have to do with the royal family, or films about the First World War, like the Battle of the Somme. So there are many points of comparison, I think. And a film like Karađorđe, I think, is, in terms of its cinematic quality, is most distinctive in this sense. If we look at the poetic quality it has, with the way it connects kind of poetry, epic poetry, at least in the Serbian tradition, history, and that the way that that I think that can touch people regardless of whether they're Serbs or not. So it's not. We've spoken about this because I think it's a lot of people who may be outside Serbia, but even the former Yugoslavia, may not know so much about this film. So it's kind of just to give them some kind of context and when it was made. But I think another thing in terms of, besides the cinematic quality, which is important, is also the quality in which how the films were made. And I mentioned one of the really unique things about Serbia and then later Yugoslavia would be the fact that these films were made by on a grassroots level by people who were enthusiasts from other professions. My favorite is like you had in the 1920s someone who was a policeman making films. That also goes down as early pioneers. So it's just, I think that mode of production combined with the cinematic quality is what makes the film really interesting. And actually, if you look at it if I can just say a final thing, if you look at examples of the way kind of what epic tradition or the Kosovo battle or what that meant to Serbs, and also the way that's made kind of in the earlier editions before the 90s, it's quite fascinating because you have a film like the commemoration. There's a great documentary by, I think it's Kosta Novaković, from 1939 called The Celebration of the 550th Anniversary of the Battle of Kosovo. And then that film is a combined kind of fictional stage. It combines fictional staging with documentary of the same event kind of being relived in Yugoslavia at the time. So it's very interesting in the way it kind of combines its significance, not only for Serbs, but also the other people that live in Yugoslavia. And this is strikingly different to how it was represented or used and misused by some people in the 1990s and now we can say, as His Royal Highness said, the things that attract media attention may be when there's killing going on, but the good and beautiful and virtuous parts are often hidden away, and I think it's those that are worth talking about. So.
Marvelous. I can really see it being used in education for those very reasons.
Yeah, I would love to. So yes, I 100% agree with you. If there's ways we can do this, we will also try to do everything we can, and I'll do everything I can to make that happen. So thank you for that. Thank you so much, George.
Thank you
for joining us.
Thanks.
Thank you. I think if we have maybe one or two more questions, and then we can wrap up because it would be nice to kind of I think it's been very nice to keep it very concise and have a good discussion. We'll see if there's any other questions in the chat. Does anybody have any other questions that they want to raise themselves? Or if not, I can say one final thing, and it was actually pointed out to me by Roger Smither, who did the review of Karađorđe. And there's this fascinating thing about the film, and I never paid attention to this before, if I must say myself, is the use of intertitles. Now, we don't pay attention to this in silent cinema. We think, intertitles are just there to describe stuff to us that's going on. But we don't think about their timing. So often intertitles, and he makes this point, come before a scene, and they kind of contextualize and frame, if you like, the scene for you and tell you what's about to happen. And what's interesting in Karađorđe is they often come afterwards. So they often, like, you often see and this is another thing that I think makes it so poetic, the film, because often you're there to interpret visually, you know, the film language, what's going on. And sometimes it's quite disorienting because you don't even have, there's scenes even where they don't even tell you exactly, you know, what, with the intertitles, what's going on. It's left to you for inference, or to realize yourself. So, and Mr. Smither raises this question of, you know, is this a common trait across Serbian and Yugoslav and films from the Balkans generally? I think that's quite a question kind of to be open. But I would like to kind of keep this film. I think there's a massive kind of value in looking at this film, both historically, culturally, and most of all artistically. So, and I think it can be used in education, but it's also should be enjoyed because it's a great film to watch. And it's actually, the surviving copy is about an hour. So, so I think, yes, I think it's a great kind of film to watch, and I'm glad basically I hope you'll have an opportunity to watch it again and discover more. From those final recommendation, from those who want to discover more about the royal family, you can, through our website, you can find out more about the history of the royal family. You can also see the royal family of Serbia. Regarding the films themselves, I mentioned the coronation of King Peter I of Serbia from 1904. It's a short film. You can find this online, I'm sure. And then there's also recent examples. Some other good films there's one called The Golgotha of Serbia. That's a fascinating film about the First World War. For me, it's one of the most fascinating documents about the First World War because some of it was shot in the battlefield. So it's really like, it's striking how the film is made. And then the most recent example that I mentioned with the great actor Lazar Ristovski is there's King Peter I of Serbia, and that was a film made in 2018. And the way it kind of honors the memory of 100 years since, you know, the centenary of the First World War is quite striking. So I think, and it's also with respect to what George said, I think some of the questions we received, it shows you the war in quite a different light and what it meant for people then and what it should mean for us now. Thank you.